Hey everybody, it's Katie. So today we are going to make a knotted necklace with gemstone beads. The knotting is not just for pearls. I love it with gemstones. It creates a beautiful necklace. The great thing about the knot is that if your necklace does break, you're only going to lose one bead because there is a knot between each one, keeping them secure. Okay, so the things to keep in mind when knotting a gemstone necklace is that the beads may have all different sizes of holes. So if you pick beads that have too big of a difference between the size of the holes, you may have trouble knotting them together. You may have to do a double knot with the beads that have the biggest holes. Now with these beads that I've picked here, I've got some beautiful golden rulated quartz, some peridot, and some bronzite. And the peridot has the smallest holes. Now there's a couple different kinds of strings that you can use to do these knotted necklaces. The ones that I like to use is one I like to use Eslon. It comes on a spool like this. It's nylon. This is the one that I use, and it's great. It's a 0.5 millimeter thickness of size, and it comes in all sorts of different colors, and it's a big old spool, so you can get a whole bunch of necklaces off of it. And then you can also use like a big eye needle to thread on your cording to help you thread on your beads. Now I love this cord because it is nylon. It doesn't stretch out like silk does, but the disadvantage is when you thread on a needle, it does make your thread double when you pull your bead on. Now that's not a problem for that bead, and it's not a problem for this bead, but for my peridot, that's a problem. Like I can't even get this one over the eye of the big eye needle. Even though the big eye needle is a collapsible big eye needle, I can't even get that one on. This one the same way. So I could either just abandon this necklace idea of using the peridot with the bronzite and the rutilated quartz, or I can go to my other option. My other option being carded silk that has the needle pre-attached. Now the great thing about this carded silk is it comes in all different sizes as well as colors. You can, pearls have teeny tiny little holes, so this comes in a really small size you could use for pearls, and it comes in a really big size as well. For my project, I have gotten a 6, and I'll show you. I have one 6 already open to show you all, but I've made a knot there on one end, and this is just for demonstrative purposes. But you'll be able to see that on this, I can string on that bead, I can string on this bead, and because I don't have to double my thread over to put a needle on, I should be able to also thread on this bead. Now it's a little tight on there. Some of them I might have to see which one goes on the best. You know, I might try it, and if it's too snug, like this one doesn't want to go over as well, I might have to pick and choose which of these peridots I use if I really want to do the peridot with these other beads, or I'll just have to do a smaller size silk. The trouble though is if I do a smaller size silk is that then the knots I make may be too small to keep these beads on. You can see with this one, let me clear off my space a little bit better. It has a knot at the end of this, and you can see that it keeps the bead from pulling off. But if I do much thinner silks, okay, so like this one is a 6. If I try a 4 with my peridots, they go on there a little easier. It's still a little tricky, and I think it's more the eye of the needle that I'm having trouble with than necessarily the silk side itself. So sometimes what I'll do with that is I'll come in here and I'll find the eye of the needle, and I just actually kind of collapse it even further. I'm just kind of closing it up. So it might be more of a circle shape, the eye of the needle, and I'm just making it more of an oval to better accommodate the bead that I want to put on there. There you go. See, it slid on much easier now. Now the trouble though is if you're forcing your bead on, you're going to be fraying it at this needle connection, and if your needle breaks off, then you're pretty much screwed. You can't put another needle on because, again, like I said, if you double the thread, then it's probably too thick to go through the size of these little tiny holes. Now with this one, I'm going to go ahead and thread this on as well, and I pulled it down to the end. See, look what happened. It had a knot, but this bead just pulled all the way off. So even though a size 4 silk may work better with these peridots, it doesn't work with these rutilated quartz. The holes are just too large. So that's the trouble you run into when you're knotting a variety of gemstones together, is finding a size silk that makes big enough knots not to pull through the holes of your biggest bead, yet is thin enough to fit through and not fry your thread when you thread on these smaller beads. So what I am going to do is I am going to show you guys how we prepare our silk. So if you're using the nylon cord like this, you don't have to do anything to prepare it. You can just cut a length however long you want and you're good to go. With the carded silk, you actually need to stretch the silk out before using it. So we're gonna go ahead, I'm gonna demonstrate how you would stretch out the silk. So first things first, we need to decard our whole card of silk. Now there is a needle, you have to find where it is tucked up underneath the rest of your cord. So there we go, and then I need to, it's also tucked up over here. So I need to pull it out and unwind the whole card of silk. Okay, once I've decarded my silk, you will see that it has all these kinks in the silk. We want to get rid of those. The reason being, our knots will want to sit in those kinks. And also by pre-stretching our silk, we make our necklace last longer. So what happens with knotted necklaces with silk over time, the weight of the beads will stretch the silk and create space between your beads and your knots. So you may start out having a really tightly knotted necklace, and then after a while it just stretches out. So what we're going to do is we're going to take 2 dowel rods, and I'm wrapping the thread around it and I'm overlapping the tail here to hold it tight, and then I hold on to that one and I wrap it around several times the other one. You want about 6 inches or so. You don't want too big of a section or it'd be too difficult to tug on. And so I'm just pulling back and forth in both directions, and you can see it gets rid of the kinks. The thicker the cord, the harder it is to do this. So it's really easy on a 4. I have to tug a little bit hard on this 6, and with an 8 or something like that, you really have to tug. All right, so it's okay if you have a few kinks here at the end of your cord. We're not going to worry about those, but we're going to work our way almost all the way to the needle. Again, we're going to leave little space by the needle that has kinks in it still, but you just want to stretch that out till you don't have any kinks. If you have a hard time getting the kinks out, you might, wind it up and do a smaller section so you get better grip. I've also heard of people, we're just gonna tug on the silk. I'm gonna continue doing that till I have all my silk stretched out, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I have my card of silk all stretched out except for a few kinks here at the end with the needle and a few at the end where the tail is. Now, a card of silk, this card of silk anyways, is 2 meters, which is approximately 6 feet, 6.4 inches long. So I find with a card of silk that's that length, I can make 2 18-inch necklaces and a bracelet. So if you want to make a longer necklace, you most certainly could. You can make a 36-inch necklace or a little bit longer than that. And I don't see any reason you would want a necklace much longer than even 30 inches. I think it's usually the max length that I make. So you should have plenty of silk on this card to make a necklace however long you want it. That being said, we're going to start at the end without the needle attached. That way we can utilize the silk as best we can, have that piece that we have left have the needle still attached. So what I'm going to do is for this one, I'm going to add a bead cone and a clasp like this sample here. So when you do that, what you need to do is you need to cut yourself a piece of wire. I'm working in this kind of bronzy color, so I'm using a 20 gauge vintage bronze color of wire. And I'm going to cut myself 3 inches or so of wire, and I'm going to create a loop at one end. Now, if you need help creating a wire wrap loop, I do have a video showing it step by step, slowed down, on how to make a loop. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time showing you guys or explaining to you really how I make this loop. Okay? Alright, so once I have my loop done, I need to attach my thread. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to find the end of my silk, so the end without the needle. Let's find that. All right, here we go. And what we're going to do is we are going to thread our cord through the eye of the needle, and we are going to create a knot. All I'm doing is I'm making a loop, and I'm pulling the tail through like so. Okay? And I'm going to do that 2 more times, and then I'm going to glue the knot so that it's nice and secure. Now this will be all up inside of our bead cone, so you won't see this at all when you're done, as long as you pick the right length of bead cone. So if you have a really short bead cone, say like, let me grab one, this one for example, and I try and thread that on, look, our knot is hanging out the bottom. So you're gonna have to find a appropriately sized bead cone to accommodate this loop. I also show you in my other video how to use clamshells if you'd rather use a clamshell than a bead cone. All right, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to thread my bead cone on here and see how it hides up inside of there, and you won't see the knot when I'm finished. But before I do that, I'm actually going to glue my knots for some extra security. I like to use Hypo Cement. So here it is here. It comes in a red box. It's GS Hypo Cement. What I like about this is it dries clear and flexible when you're finished. So unlike super glue, which would freeze the knot and make it very stiff, this knot is going to have some flex and give to it. All right, so I'm gluing the knot. I'm gluing it on all sides, making sure I get the whole knot everywhere. And then I'm gluing a little ways down each side on the silk just to secure it there as well. The hardest thing about this glue is getting the little tiny pin back into the applicator. You can see it's got this really nice little precision tip, and it has this pin that you have to then fit back inside of there to keep it nice and closed. Alrighty then. So this takes a little while to dry. Once it is dry though, you are going to clip off the rest of your tail. I usually leave a little bit of a tail, and I'll clip between the section that I've glued. I've glued a little way up here, and I'll clip between that, and it'll keep it from fraying. So that's all we're going to do. I'm going to go ahead and keep going, so I'm going to clip it before it's quite dry all the way, but I would recommend letting that dry completely, and then thread on my bead cone. All right, so now what I'm going to do to start my necklace is I'm going to take one of these beautiful rutilated quartz, and I am going to string it on there and pull it all the way down to my bead cone. All right, and see how that fits nicely in that cone right there? Perfect. All right, so now that I've tested my bead, I like how this cone works. I'm going to finish it off by doing a wire wrap at the top. I am going to grab a clasp, so I'm just going to use a lobster, but you can use a toggle or, you know, like anything that you prefer to use. Okay, so then I'm going to finish it off doing a wire wrap loop and attaching it to my clasp. Now again, if you need help doing a wire wrapped loop, I do show you how to do that in another video. But for this one, basically we make our loop, and before we do the wrap section, we're going to thread on our clasp so that it is connected into that loop there, and then we finish off by wrapping it nice and tight. Okay. Looking good, looking good. All right. Let me clip off the excess wire. And we are good to go. All right. So now I'm going to put my bead up there next to my bead cone, and I'm going to do my first knot. So what you're going to need is you're going to need to grab your fine tipped tweezers. Okay, so let's get on to doing the knotting, shall we? All right, so what you're going to do is you're going to hold it in your hand. You're going to wrap your thread around your hand, cross it at the top, and hold that cross section down with your thumb. Then from the back side, we're going to go underneath the tight thread that you wrapped around your hand. You're you're going to grab that loose thread, the tail end, and pull it all the way through. So now essentially you have a loose knot, see? All right, we're going to keep that on our hand. Now you want to make sure you keep your beads on your palm side of your hand, not towards your fingers, keep it on the palm side of your hand. Take your tweezers, go underneath that thread, and grab the thread coming out of your bead at the top of the bead at the tip of your tweezers. See, at the very tip of your tweezers. If you grab it further down, you're not going to get a nice tight knot. So you want to always make sure that you grab it at the tip of your tweezers. You're going to take your hand off, take your hand out, leaving that loose knot around your tweezers. And you're going to pull on the thread tail end and pull it down to the bead. Now what I like to do is I like to kind of push my fingernails against the knot as I pull out my tweezers, and it tightens it slightly down towards my bead. Now we need to tighten it the rest of the way. How we're going to do that is we're going to use our tweezers. So now see how when I hold them closed there's a little bit of a gap there? Now when I pinch them closed really tightly there is no gap. We just want to hold our tweezers so that they're gently closed, just the tips are touching, and there is that gap there. Because what we're going to do is we're going to put our thread in that little crook of the tweezers where it has that gap, and we're just going to lightly tap down. Now if you were to pinch your tweezers shut all the way like this while grabbing your thread and pull down, you're going to slice your silk with the edges of your tweezers, which can be a little sharp. So make sure that when you close them, you're just gently holding it and tapping down to tighten that knot. Alrighty, looky there, looky, you got your first knot. So now we're going to continue by adding our next bead. We're going to do one of these bronzite beads next. We're going to do the same process. I'm going to demonstrate it a few more times for you guys to make sure you get the hang of how you're going to do the knots. Put your beads in your hand, wrap the thread around your hand, cross over the top, hold the cross section, go to the back side of your hand, underneath a tight thread, grabbing the tail end, that loose thread, pulling it all the way through. And now we have our loose knot. We're going to go under the thread, grab it at the top of the bead towards the tip of the tweezers, taking your hand out and knotting, pulling it down the knot, remove your tweezers, and gently tap it down to tighten. Now, if you happen to get a knot somewhere that you don't want it to be, like for example, it's up higher than what you want it, you want to take that knot out before you tighten it down. Once you tighten it down, it's going to be incredibly difficult for you to be able to tell which thread is which. And because this is like a twisted thread, if you can see, it's got two threads twisted together. There you go. It's very easy once you've made a knot to split the threads if you use something like an awl or like a thumbtack to try and undo the knot. So be very, very careful if you're trying to take out a knot that you don't split the threads, because you can make more of a mess than you're not being in quite the right space. All right, so we're going to continue on. Now I'm going to add a few peridot, and now, like I said, these are the ones that are a little bit small, so I can have a little bit trouble getting them on over my thread. Now I'm going to go and close this eye of the needle up just a little bit. Let me see if I can get it in focus. See how you can actually see that eye of that needle there? So if I take my tweezers and I just kind of pinch that eye shut, there we go. It's going to be much easier for my peridot with the tiny little holes to go over top. Now this one still doesn't want to go. So like I said, if you have some beads that have really tiny holes, you might have to try several beads before it'll work. Okay. There we go. This one had no problem. So you may have to then save these ones for a strung beaded project instead of a knotted one. There we go. So we're going to do one more. I'm going to show you how to do it again. Hold it in your hand, wrap it around your hand, hold the cross section under the thread, pull it through. One of the problems I see a lot of people do is at this stage, they forget to go under the thread with their tweezers and they just go on top and grab it. Your knot is not going to be on your tweezers when you take your hand out, so make sure you pull it here. The other thing people like to do is pull your beads to that side. No, 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 Again, your knot is not going to be on your tweezers. Okay? Another thing a lot of times people do is they forget that step where they pull the thread through, so then they have no knot at all. So even though they go under here and grab it, when they take their hand out, the knot just is not there because they haven't actually made it. That step of pulling the thread through is what gives you your knot. All right, so let's go ahead and do it again. Going to get it as close to the bead as you can before pulling your tweezers out, and then tighten it down. Well, there you go. Okay, so I have strung, well, I actually knotted my necklace here to be, I want to finish 24-inch length, so I've done it for 12 inches. I just did kind of a random pattern and just picked up beads as I went. What I want to do is actually add a little tassel in the bottom. So I'm going to put this half of a toggle, clasp, and then I'm actually going to wire wrap some beads and, you know, the different ones that I use in the necklace and hang them off of it as like little charms. And we're going to do that after we've knotted the whole thing. But when we get to this point where you've got it half the length that we want to add on our clasp here. So we're going to go through this gold rutilated quartz bead, string that all the way down, and then we're going to take our clasp and we're going to thread our needle through the loop and pull that down towards your beads. Now what I'm doing is I'm going to come back up through this bead, and it's going to create a loop around my clasp that I'm using as my focal. Just like so. All right. So now what you want to do is you want to create another knot, and then we'll add our beads and string for the other half. So just make sure this is pulled up nice and tight here. So we're going to wrap it around our hand, pull the tail in through. And then this part is a little tricky because you want to make sure that you get that knot nice and tight next to your rutilated quartz bead, but just going to do it the same as all the other ones where you grab it, that cord right where it's coming out of the bead, and pull it nice and tight. Tighten it down, and there you go. So we're just going to continue on, and I'm doing a random pattern, so I'm not mirroring the beads on each side. It's going to be a free form sort of a pattern. And so let's knot this one. There you go, I've started my next strand. So then we just continue this whole rest of the strand like we did all this first part. Okay, so now I'm going to end it off. I've got it the length that I want, and I do a knot right after the last bead. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a wire wrap loop that I've already made, and I'm going to thread that on with my needle. Pull that all the way down to my beads here. All right. Okay, so now we need to make a knot around this wire bar close to our beads, okay? So I'm going to just make a loop. Pull that thread through the loop. So see, I have a knot right there, but it's loose. And I'm going to pull it so that it is close down to the bead, and try and get it as tight as I can. There you go. And I'm going to do a couple knots, just kind of like what we did at the beginning where we want extra knots for security. And I'll probably do about 3 knots and then glue it like I did before. Okay, so once I have it knotted several times, before I glue it, I'm going to make sure that it fits up inside my bead cone. And if it doesn't, then I'll have to try and adjust the knots. But yeah, it fits pretty well. So I'm going to go ahead and glue the knot with hypo cement. Make sure, again, you glue the whole knot all the way around, all sides, and a little ways up the cording as well. And then I would let this dry for a little bit and clip it off. And we're going to thread on our bead cone now. Okay. And do a wire wrap loop to attach the other side of our clasp. So we need this little connector guy now because we have the lobster on that side. Alrighty. So now the only thing left for our necklace here is to add our bead dangles, where we're going to wire wrap some beads and attach them to this with jump rings. Okay, so let's wire wrap some dangles. So I have a head pin, which basically a head pin is a piece of wire with a little stop at the end. You can see that little head on the end. And you just string your beads and findings or whatever you want for your dangles onto the head pin. And then what you're going to do is you're going to take a pair of round nose pliers and you're going to grab that at the top of your bead like so. Alright, and you're going to put a little bend in the pliers. That little bend that you just created is where your wire wraps are going to go in a minute. Now you're going to move your bead so that one jaw of the pliers is in the bend and one is sitting on top of the bend. And you take your wire, you pull it up over the loop, down till it touches your bend. Your bead. You're going to readjust your pliers so that you have one jaw inside the loop and one is sitting on top. And now you're going to pull the wire past your bead, up underneath your pliers here, okay? And at this point, you're going to start doing the wire wrap. So you're going to take this wire and you're going to wrap it. You're going to put one wrap right underneath your loop. The next wrap goes underneath the last wrap. And you keep wrapping nice and tight till you get to the top of your bead. Now you don't want to overlap your wraps or get any gaps or anything like that. Sometimes it happens, but you're going to try for a nice consistent wrap. Okay, so after I have that, I'm going to take my wire cutters, the flat side of my wire cutters, these are flush cutters, place it up against the coil, make sure I don't cut my loop, and clip the tail off. And then if you have a little bit of a tail sticking up like there, you can take your chain nose pliers and kind of flatten them down, and there's your first dangle. Alright, so now we're going to create another dangle. I think that would look cute, right? Like that, like a little peridot, a little bronzite dangle. Make a little gemstone dangle there. And just keep doing this until you have as many dangles as you like. We're going to attach them with jump rings to our focal here. And they may sit a little differently than what you see when you're laying them out. So you may decide you need more dangles or less dangles or a different configuration of dangles once you get to that point. You may also find with the gemstone bead you have to try several before you find a hole that will fit, or change your plan altogether because none of them will fit on the head pin. That would be cute.